So today I wanted to make a video on one of my favorite lenses, if not my favorite lens in my collection, which is a Sigma 35mm f1.4 art lens for the Canon mount. I'm actually filming this video right now on the Sigma 35mm 1.4, so it should give you a pretty good idea of what the lens looks like for video. I've shot hours and hours of video on this lens and thousands of photos, and I want to talk about some of the key things that I really enjoy about this lens. Now, the first point I want to make actually might have some controversy, and that's the sharpness of this lens. This lens is tack sharp. When you're shooting photos and you're even at f1.4, wide open, it's tack sharp, there's no purple fringing, and I have mixed feelings about that personally. Sometimes I do like the photo to be tack sharp, but sometimes it's nice to have a little softness, and the reason that that has some controversy is every lens has their different characteristics. You know, when you're looking at a lens, you're not just looking at the sharpness, it's like the color, the contrast, all these different things. But for the most part, the sharpness of this lens is seen as a pro, and that can be said for the whole Sigma Art Series lineup. All of the Art Series lenses, from what I've seen, are tack sharp, even wide open, and they have like very little artifacts. They overall produce super high quality images that you'll still get when you invest in a Canon L Series lens, but some of the L Series lenses actually are not as sharp as the Sigma Art lineup. I'm sure you'd have to zoom in like 3:1 to see the real difference, but I'm pretty sure that this 35mm is sharper than the Canon's 35mm, which is pretty crazy because this is already cheaper since it's a third-party lens, so you're paying less money and getting technically better lens performance. So the first thing that I do really like is the sharpness of the lens. It's really pleasing when you're at f1.4 and you're taking like a portrait and you want to get that eye in focus, and it's just tack sharp. It's pretty amazing to see that. Next point that I want to talk about kind of piggybacks off the first part in the fact that it has to do with image quality, but not necessarily sharpness. So the thing that I love about this lens is it produces basically no purple fringing. For example, my buddy and I shot a film that we wrote the past summer, and there was a scene where the main talent was in the kitchen, and above the talent were these super white bright lights, and we were shooting up at him. So these white lights were backlighting him, but there was no purple fringing. It was just a nice highlight rollover. You didn't have any purple fringing, and it overall just looked really pleasing versus having the outline of his hair be completely purple. And this is something that does seem very small, and it is pretty small in the grand scheme of things with photography and videography, but it's actually something that people can pick up on. People that aren't photographers, people that aren't videographers. I was scrolling through some wedding photos that I shot on my aunt's wedding about a month ago, and I was showing my mom some of them, and my mom is not a photographer or a videographer. She probably doesn't know what purple fringing even is. But there was a shot actually with, I think it was my 50mm 1.8, the little nifty 50, and I was down at 1.8, and the back of the subject was super backlit. It was the cake, and you could just see purple fringing all around. And she was like, "Why is that purple?" So it is something that, you know, people who aren't experienced in seeing the differences with the more expensive versus cheap lenses, that they can actually pick these things out, versus extreme sharpness to, you know, a softer lens. So I think it is important to count things like chromatic aberration and purple fringing into the equation when you're looking at a lens, at least in my opinion. Well, the third and pretty much last thing that I want to talk about that I really enjoy about this lens is kind of a given. It's f1.4. For the majority of my photography and videography, I guess you could say career, for the past 5 years, the widest any of my lenses would open up to was 1.8, and seeing the difference between 1.8 and 1.4 was actually pretty astonishing, and it does create a much more pleasing depth of field in the background. If you're really going for that out of focus background, The 1.4 versus 1.8 does make a pretty large difference, but if you're just jumping into photography, I wouldn't really start looking at the 1.4 lenses. The 1.8s will definitely do the trick, but this 1.4 has come in handy so many times. We probably shot the film that I was talking about earlier. A majority of it was with this lens. It was probably about, I want to say like 65% with this lens. So the Sigma has really come to be one of my favorite lenses. I didn't think I'd like the 35mm focal length on the full frame. I thought it'd be too wide, but it seems to be just about right. I still do prefer the 50mm, but I love this lens, and it's definitely one of my favorite lenses that I've ever owned. But it's so hard to say that because every lens has their specialty, you know, their use, but I overall really enjoy using this lens. It's so nice to just pop it on your camera and walk around with it and get some shots. It's an amazing, amazing, beautiful lens.